Benito Mussolini spent decades building an illusion. He wanted the world to see his regime as a flawless return to Roman martial supremacy, where the trains ran on time and the military moved in perfect lockstep. Look at this photo from the 1930s. You see Mussolini marching proudly with his top brass. These men were paraded as modern conquerors, fresh off vicious campaigns in East Africa and the Balkans. They looked invincible. But a propaganda film is entirely different from a two-front global war. Once the Allies started pushing back across North Africa and Sicily, the cracks in the fascist machine tore wide open, and the Italian high command turned on itself. Look at how these commanders actually died, and a dark paradox emerges. The men who simply did their jobs, or even tried to resist the Nazis, were butchered. Yet the generals who orchestrated actual genocides lived to see their 80s and died quietly in their own beds. This diagram outlines the reality of the Italian collapse. When the regime broke, the fates of its most powerful military men split down three separate paths: battlefield casualties, the purged and betrayed, and the unpunished. For these generals, the most lethal threats were their own anti-aircraft crews, vengeful former colleagues, and the cynical math of the coming Cold War. Let's start with the front lines. Here, systemic incompetence and chronic supply shortages ensured that high-ranking deaths were messy and unpredictable. Take Italo Balbo, a charismatic air marshal so popular he was seen as a potential successor to Mussolini. In June 1940, while flying into an airfield in Libya, his bomber approached low against the glaring sun. His own anti-aircraft crews panicked, mistook him for a British plane, and shot him out of the sky. Or General Joseph Tolera. During a desperate retreat in Egypt, he found himself personally fighting from the inside of an M1340 tank, this exact model. He was leading a poorly coordinated, last-ditch armored charge when the tank was disabled, leaving him mortally wounded inside. 2 years later, in Sicily, General Enrico Francisci was trying to coordinate a counterattack against American troops. He climbed on top of a self-propelled artillery vehicle to direct his men. A single tank shell instantly decapitated him. For this first group, the military structure they served offered them almost zero protection. Their command fell apart around them, ensuring their deaths on the battlefield were swift and completely absurd. But battlefield chaos was nothing compared to what happened after September 8, 1943. On that day, Italy officially signed an armistice with the Allies, upending the rules of survival for the military elite overnight. Suddenly, the German forces occupying Italy were enemies. They immediately turned their guns on the Italians, creating a deadly trap for commanders trying to follow orders and surrender. Admiral Carlo Bergamini was ordered to sail the Italian fleet to Allied-controlled Malta. Instead, German bombers intercepted them off the coast of Sardinia. They dropped Fritz X guided bombs, a highly advanced anti-ship weapon the Italians hadn't even seen before. 2 hits obliterated his flagship, the Roma, killing him and over 1,300 crewmen. General Antonio Gandin commanded a division stationed in Greece. When the Germans demanded they disarm, Gandin actually held a democratic vote among his soldiers. They chose to fight.
They held out until their ammunition ran dry. The Germans then executed Gandin and massacred roughly 5,000 of his men. Mussolini's German-backed republic in the north launched a violent internal purge, as hardline loyalists hunted down the former colleagues who had voted to remove the Duce from power. That purge claimed Emilio de Bono. He was one of the original 4 leaders who organized the March on Rome decades earlier. Despite his age and veteran status, the 77-year-old was tied to a chair in Verona and executed by a firing squad, shot squarely in the back. In the fractured reality of 1943, personal loyalty to the king, or displaying even a shred of political independence, became an automatic death sentence. Contrast the tragic deaths of the combatants and betrayed with the shocking survival of the regime's worst war criminals, the butchers of Ethiopia, Libya, and Yugoslavia. Let's look at Pietro Badoglio, Rodolfo Braziani, and Mario Roata. Between the 3 of them, they oversaw the mass use of poison gas in Ethiopia, concentration camps in Libya, and brutal mass deportations in Yugoslavia. They were monsters. This diagram maps out the extradition requests filed by Yugoslavia and African nations after the war. But notice the massive roadblocks. American and British intelligence agencies actively shielded these men from prosecution.
prioritizing them as valuable anti-communist assets for the looming Cold War. Badoglio played his cards perfectly. By defecting to the Allies at the right moment and negotiating the armistice, he secured total immunity. He was never charged for his genocide of Libyan Arabs or dropping mustard gas in Africa. Mario Rowata, nicknamed the Beast for his village-burning campaigns in the Balkans, was actually put on trial, but he simply escaped from a hospital in Rome and fled directly into the protection of fascist Spain.
Graziani served a brief prison sentence before being released due to declining health. He died naturally in a hospital bed at age 72. More than 100,000 people attended his massive funeral, raising fascist banners in the streets of Rome. The lesson here is sickeningly clear. Orchestrating the murder of thousands was entirely survivable, as long as you were politically useful to the incoming global superpowers. When you line up these three fates side by side, the myth of post-war justice completely evaporates. There was no moral reckoning at the end of the line. The closest thing to it was the brutal street justice dealt to men like Achille Starace, Mussolini's fanatical enforcer. He was captured by partisans while out for a morning jog. They dragged him out, showed him Mussolini's hanging corpse, shot him, and strung him up right next to his boss. Starace gets a bullet and a meat hook. General Gandin fights to the last bullet and gets a firing squad. But Badoglio and Rowata? They get to quietly write their memoirs and die of old age. Post-war justice proved entirely transactional. The system ignored actual human rights abuses, favoring leverage and political convenience over moral accountability. The deaths of fascist Italy's most powerful commanders prove a harsh reality. When a totalitarian regime finally collapses, your survival has nothing to do with right and wrong. It depends entirely on the luck of the battlefield, the exact timing of your betrayal, and the deliberate amnesia of the victors.